The eagle stone didn't make this list. Women tied it to the left arm during pregnancy to hold the child in, then moved it to the thigh when labor began so it would release. It's documented in Hildegard of Bingen, in apothecary records, in household inventories through the 15th century. It didn't rank because it was one of perhaps 40 similar talismanic practices, none of them structurally distinct from the rest of medieval medicine. What ranks here is the machinery around birth. Who held authority in that room, who bore legal weight when it ended, and what the church was willing to grant when a soul was at stake. One of those grants gave a legal capacity to lay people that had never existed before. That's number 2. What ranks at number 1 isn't a remedy or a right. It's a room, and the kind of authority that room created had no equivalent anywhere else in medieval life. Number 5, the birthing stool. Medieval women did not give birth lying on their backs. They labored upright on a low-curved seat with an open center, a U-shape that let the infant descend while keeping the mother's pelvis in a position that worked with gravity rather than against it. The stool had handles on either side to grip and bear down against during contractions. A midwife knelt in front to receive the child. This wasn't medieval improvisation. The same upright position appears in Egyptian tomb paintings, Roman obstetric texts, and throughout the trotula, the standard collection on women's medicine that circulated through Europe from the 12th century onward. The shift to laboring on the back came in the 17th century, when male physicians began attending births and found the supine position easier for observation and intervention. Before that change, upright was the default. The stool sits at 5 because it describes the physical reality of delivery. The entries above it describe who held authority over that process and what that authority cost. The change that put women on their backs came from outside the room. Everything above this entry concerns what happened inside it. Number 4. St. Margaret. When a delivery became difficult, the first response was not manual, it was devotional. St. Margaret of Antioch held specific jurisdiction over childbirth in medieval Europe. Her legend involved being swallowed alive by a dragon and surviving by bursting through its side, which gave her, by a theological logic that was internally consistent, if not biomedical, authority over safe emergence from enclosed spaces. Her written life was read aloud during hard contractions. In some accounts, it was placed directly on the laboring woman's abdomen. Household manuscript collections assembled specifically for use during birth sometimes contained her vita and little else. The relic loans operated on connections and rank. What the midwife carried into that room came from a different source entirely, one that came with the possibility of a church court summons. Westminster Abbey owned a girdle it claimed had belonged to the Virgin Mary, which it loaned to noblewomen and queens during labor. Catherine of Aragon had it sent to her during her confinements in the 1510s. A relic made a road journey from London to wherever the Queen was lying in, on loan for as long as the labor lasted. This ranks at 4 because access to that kind of object scaled with wealth. The entries above it applied regardless of status. The midwife coordinating all of this had also been given a capacity by the church that had nothing to do with herbs or handling, one that would cost her professionally if she failed to exercise it. Number 3. The churching. A woman who survived childbirth was not immediately returned to ordinary life. For roughly 40 days afterward, she occupied a ritually impure state, not sinful, but liminal, between her old position in the community and full reintegration into it. The ceremony ending this period was called churching, a Thanksgiving Mass held at the church door or inside the nave, depending on local practice. Until she was churched, she was barred from entering the church, prohibited in many communities from preparing food for others, and expected to abstain from sexual relations. The church framed all of this as gratitude for her survival. The prohibitions applied regardless of framing. If she died in that 40-day window without having been churched, the spiritual accounting was incomplete, and the weight of that fell on her family. The churching sits above 4 because it applied equally to every woman regardless of wealth, and because it extended birth's consequences far beyond the delivery itself. It sits below 2 because it was a restriction placed on women, not a power given to one. The entries above it are about authority, not limitation. What comes above this entry isn't a restriction placed on women. It's an authority assigned to one specific person. And if she failed to use it, the consequences were hers alone. Number 2. Midwife baptism. Medieval canon law held that an unbaptized soul could not enter heaven. An infant who died before a priest arrived was, by that logic, lost. The Church's solution was to grant midwives the formal authority to perform emergency baptism. And this was a codified legal grant, not an informal accommodation. It was one of the only instances in medieval church history where a sacramental act was delegated to a layperson who was not ordained. Midwives were instructed in the correct Latin formula and expected to know it under pressure. If an infant's head emerged but the body remained inside, baptism of the head was valid. If the child was entirely undelivered, water could be introduced. Ecclesiastical synods across England, France, and Germany issued these instructions repeatedly from the 12th century into the 15th. The frequency of repetition suggesting the Church wanted no ambiguity and no room for a midwife to claim she hadn't known. The grant came with accountability. A midwife who failed to baptize a dying infant could be summoned before a church court. The authority and the liability were the same thing. This ranks above churching because it was an active legal capacity assigned to a specific person, not a restriction imposed on women generally, but a power held by one. What sits above it is the structure that made her the only witness to everything else that happened in that room. The baptism authority was formal, documented, and regulated. What sits above it left almost no documentation, because there was no one outside that room to record it. Number 1. The closed chamber. When a medieval woman went into labor, the men left. The husband, the male servants, any physician who happened to be present, all of them out. The birthing chamber belonged entirely to women. The midwife, female relatives, female neighbors. Enforcement was real. Male physicians were excluded from normal deliveries, and documented cases treat the restriction as absolute. In situations where a physician's advice was needed, he gave it through the door or had it relayed by the midwife, who then applied whatever she judged appropriate inside the room. Within the chamber, the midwife's authority was total. She managed the labor, made the decisions, set the sequence of events. No one in that room outranked her professionally. Outside it, the husband had no independent access to what had occurred. He received a report, everything he knew about the birth, whether the infant had breathed, in what order twins had arrived, whether a child had been born alive and then died, came entirely from the women who had been present. Medieval courts had to navigate this. Inheritance disputes, legitimacy questions, and succession cases sometimes rested entirely on testimony about what had happened inside the birthing room. The midwife's account was the authoritative one. She could testify that a child had emerged before its twin, or had never breathed, or had been born alive. No other witness existed. No one could contradict her from outside the door. The closed chamber was not a concession to modesty. It produced a specific, enforceable form of female authority over birth, over what officially happened, who officially entered the world, and what was officially witnessed, that had no equivalent anywhere else in medieval social life. Other entries on this list describe what women endured. This one describes what they controlled.